In the year 490 BC, the world's greatest empire turned its gaze toward a tiny corner of Greece. Persia, ruler of lands stretching from India to Egypt, arrived at the shores of Marathon with an army so vast it was said to darken the earth. Facing them stood Athens, not an empire, not a superpower, just a small city-state trembling. Yet unbroken, they were outnumbered, outarmed, and worst of all, completely alone. Sparta, their only hope, was days away, maybe longer, maybe never. On the flat, unforgiving plains of Marathon, the fate of Greece would be decided in a single day, a day when farmers would charge professional soldiers, when courage would collide with empire, when history itself would hold its breath. What happened next did more than win a battle. It shattered the myth of Persian invincibility, ignited the rise of classical Greece, and gave birth to one of the most enduring legends ever told. This is the true story of the Battle of Marathon. Now let us explore the road to invasion. There is an old saying that goes thus: there is no smoke without fire. It is a well-established fact that there is principle of cause and effect. Even Isaac Newton established it in his laws of motion, where we see that action and reaction are opposite and equal. But let us not deviate to science. The point we are trying to make is that something always leads to something. So did the Persians just wake up one morning and decide to invade Athens? The answer is no. There was an underlying conflict, but unlike modern times, where diplomacy and dialogue take the order of the day, conflict in ancient times were mostly sorted out in the known best way: war. The conflict did not begin on the beaches of Marathon. It began decades earlier, in the distant cities of Asia Minor. In 499 BC, along the western edge of the Persian Empire, Greek city-states living under Persian rule rose in open rebellion. These were prosperous coastal cities, traders, shipbuilders, centers of Greek culture now taxed, watched, and commanded by foreign governors. What began as political unrest soon exploded into violence. Against impossible odds, the rebels reached across the sea for help. Athens answered. So did Eretria. They sent ships, they sent men, they sent fire. Together, the Greeks struck deep into Persian territory, burning the great city of Sardis, a symbolic wound to the heart of the empire. The flames did not last long, but the insult did. Far away, on a golden throne in Persia, King Darius, I was told that a small city called Athens had dared to challenge him. According to ancient historians like Herodotus in his Histories, Book 5, Chapter 105, he ordered a servant to repeat a single phrase to him every day: "Master, remember the Athenians." By 493 BC, Persian armies had crushed the revolt. One by one, the rebel cities fell. Their leaders were executed, their walls were torn down, the Aegean coast was forced back into submission, but Darius was not satisfied. The rebellion had been punished, now it would be avenged. This vengeance would be in blood, as a quote coined later in the 18th century goes: "Revenge is a dish best served cold." In 492 BC, Persia launched its first great expedition against mainland Greece. An enormous army marched west while a vast fleet followed the coastline. It was meant to be an unstoppable force, but nature had other plans. Numerical advantage was with them. But nature itself rose against them. Near Mount Athos, violent storms smashed the Persian ships against the rocks. Hundreds were destroyed. Thousands of men were lost to the waves. The invasion collapsed before it even reached its target. The invasion collapsed before it truly began. To most kings, this would have been a warning. To Darius, it was an interruption. He was obsessed. The memory of Sardis, the audacity of Athens, it drove him. 2 years later, in 490 BC, the order was given again. This time, the invasion would come by sea. A fleet of nearly 600 ships pushed out across the Aegean, carrying soldiers, cavalry, archers, and chains for prisoners. Their mission was clear: burn Athens and Eretria to the ground. Island after island fell before them. Some surrendered without a fight. others were erased. Naxos was burned, its temples destroyed, its people scattered. Then the Persians reached Eretria. The city that had once dared to defy an empire was besieged, broken, and betrayed from within. Its walls were torn open, its people were dragged from their homes, bound and deported deep into Persian territory, living proof of what awaited those who resisted. The message was deliberate, clear, terrifying. There was only one target left. Across the water, beyond the smoke of fallen cities, stood Athens, and the Persian fleet was already on the move. The city that Darius had sworn to remember, the full might of the Persian Empire, was now headed straight for them, and the Athenians knew they would have to face them alone. What happened next would become one of the most famous battles in history, a clash that would decide the fate of Western civilization itself. As even an event during the war, whether true or false, would later result to the marathon race when the Olympic Games were established. Stay with us, as you'll surely find this piece of history interesting. Some historians say that the Athenians and her allies chose Marathon as the location for the battle, while others insisted that the Persians did not necessarily allow the Athenians chose Marathon. Instead, they argued that the location was strategically chosen by the Persians, guided by the exiled Athenian tyrant Hippias, because it suited their tactical needs, specifically for maneuvering their cavalry. However, the Athenians, under Miltiades, managed to turn this location to their advantage by waiting for the right moment to strike. Now let's reflect for a second and ask ourselves a very important question. If you were going to war to execute vengeance on your enemy's turf, would you allow your opponent pick a location for the battle? Or could it be the Persians were overconfident or underestimated the Athenians? I would like to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Fast forward to modern-day warfare. Would the location be a problem, given we now have guided missile systems, even drone technology for recon? But for today, we are in 490 BC, so let us forget about drones and guided missiles. Let us turn our attention to warships, horses, spears, swords, and shields. The Persian fleet didn't sail blindly. They were guided. On board their ships stood exiled Athenian nobles, men who hated their own city more than they feared the invaders. They knew the coastline, the harbors, and most importantly, they knew Athens' weaknesses. The Persians could have attacked the city's port directly, or tried to starve it into submission. Instead, they chose Marathon. Marathon was a wide coastal plain northeast of Athens. The mountains pulled back, leaving the land open and flat. It was perfect for cavalry, perfect for archers, perfect for the kind of war Persia had mastered. Here, tens of thousands of troops could be deployed. Horses could maneuver freely, and arrows could fall like rain. Supply. Ships could anchor safely just offshore. If Athens marched out to meet them, it would be on Persian terms, and if Athens refused, the army at Marathon could simply march south, straight to the city. The year is 490 BCE. A shadow falls over Greece. The largest empire the world has ever known, the Persian Empire, has landed an invasion force on the shores of Attica at a place called Marathon. Their goal is clear: burn Athens to the ground. When the Persian ships appeared on the horizon, panic ripped through Athens. Fishermen were the first to see the sails. Hundreds of them, then thousands. News raced along the roads into the city. The enemy had landed. Now, can you imagine yourself in modern-day scenario? Let's say you are a banker, accountant, or even a teacher in the early hours of the day, just as you are about to attend to your daily affairs. Then boom, all of a sudden you hear the sound or jet fighters or warships in their hundreds or thousands heading towards your city. I'm sure that would be a frightening sight. That's exactly how the Athenians felt. I'm pretty sure the Gen Zs would take to social media to narrate their ordeal, but hey, this was ancient Athens. No internet, no social media. All they could do was fear and panic for the safety of their lives. In the city, a heavy silence hangs in the air. The normally bustling agora is empty. The streets, usually filled with the sounds of merchants, philosophers, and children, are deserted. Every citizen is holding their breath, their eyes turned towards the Acropolis, where the fate of their city is being decided. The Athenian assembly met in an emergency session. A professional runner named Phidippides was sent sprinting across mountains and valleys to Sparta, begging for aid. He ran nearly 150 miles in just 2 days, a feat of endurance that defies belief, all the way to Sparta. He arrived breathless and exhausted, pleading for aid from Greece's most formidable military power. But help wouldn't come quickly. A religious festival bound the Spartans. They would not march until the full moon. Athens had days, perhaps less. The question before them was brutal. Should they hide behind their walls and wait, or march out to meet the greatest empire on earth in open battle? The numbers are grim. The Persian force is estimated at over 25,000 soldiers, a mix of infantry and cavalry, supported by a fleet of 600 ships. Facing them, Athens can muster perhaps 10,000 hoplites, citizen soldiers in bronze armor, carrying heavy shields and long spears. 10,000 against 25,000, the odds are overwhelming. The 10 generals commanding the Athenian army were divided. Some argued that Athens shouldn't risk everything in a single clash. If their army was destroyed, the city would be defenseless. The Persians could walk in unopposed, but others saw the grim truth. If the Persians were allowed to move freely, they would burn the countryside, cut off food, and terrorize the population, forcing a surrender anyway. Waiting wasn't safety, it was a slow death. The Persians are experts at siege warfare. The walls of Athens, strong as they are, cannot hold forever. Day after day, the debate rages. Every morning the generals gather, their faces etched with worry and lack of sleep. Do they wait behind the walls and cede the countryside, or do they march out and risk their entire army in a single decisive battle? Can 10,000 hoplites truly stop 25,000 Persians on an open field? The question hangs in the air, unanswered. The fate of democracy, of Western civilization as we know it, rests on their decision. As the days bleed into one another, a small glimmer of hope arrives. The tiny city of Plataea, a steadfast ally of Athens, sends their entire fighting force, 1,000 hoplites, to join the Athenian cause. It's a gesture of incredible courage, but the numbers are still terrifyingly lopsided, 11,000 against 25,000. The pressure is immense. The Persian army is encamped at Marathon, less than a day's march away. They could move on the city at any moment. The Athenian generals are divided, split 5 against 5. The stalemate paralyzes them. Arguments on the best course of action continues. One voice rose above the rest. Miltiades, a veteran of Persian warfare, he knew their tactics, their strengths, and their limits. He understood what Marathon represented. It was the one place Athens could fight on its own terms. He looks at his fellow commanders, his eyes burning with an intensity that silences the room, and he proposes something that sounds like pure madness. He argues they shouldn't wait for the Persians to come to them. They shouldn't hide behind their walls. They shouldn't even wait for the Spartans. Miltiades says they should march out immediately. They should go to Marathon, and they should attack first. The idea is insane. To voluntarily march their smaller army into the jaws of the larger one, to initiate the battle themselves on a field chosen by the enemy. It seems like suicide, but Miltiades is persuasive. He argues that the Persian army is a mix of many different peoples, not a unified force like their own. He points out that the hoplite phalanx, a wall of interlocking shields and spears, is superior to the lighter-armed Persian infantry. He argues that their only chance, their one slim hope, is to seize the initiative, to fight on their own terms, and to win a decisive victory before the Persian cavalry can be fully deployed. The mountains narrowed the battlefield, and the marshes protected the flanks. The plain, though dangerous, also offered room for speed and surprise. He paints a picture not of a desperate defense, but of a glorious, shocking assault. The plain, though dangerous, also offered room for speed and surprise. He speaks of courage, of freedom, and of the duty they owed to their city. Miltiades argued that every hour of delay favored Persia, risking betrayal, fear, or political collapse inside the city. Only action could save them. The vote was taken. Athens would march not to defend its walls, but to meet the empire on the killing ground it had chosen. Some historians say the final decision fell to the polemarch Callimachus, who holds the tie-breaking vote. One by one, the generals have made their case, half for staying, half for Miltiades' audacious plan. Callimachus listens, weighing the fate of his city in his hands. He looks at the map, he looks at the faces of the men around him, and then he casts his vote. He sides with Miltiades. The decision is made. The debate is over. The Athenian army will not cower behind its walls. They would not defend their city. They would meet the empire head-on. The order is given. By dawn, the Athenian army was moving. 10,000 citizen soldiers, farmers, craftsmen, brothers, and fathers. They marched out from the city, through the mountain passes, and down into the plain of Marathon. And when they crested the ridges and saw the Persian camp spread out below them, the scale of what awaited became terrifyingly clear. At Marathon, two worlds now stood facing one another. On one side of the plain stretched the Persian host. Row after row of tents lined the shoreline. Fires burned day and night. Horses neighed. Armor flashed in the sun. Supply ships crowded the water behind them, bringing food, weapons, and reinforcements from across the empire. This was not merely an army. It was the weight of half the known world. Persia's forces were drawn from dozens of conquered peoples: Medes, Persians, Egyptians, Assyrians, Scythians. Each brought their own weapons, their own banners, their own methods of war. At the heart of them stood the elite trained archers, disciplined infantry, and the feared Persian cavalry. Their strategy was simple, devastating, proven. First, the sky would darken with arrows. Then the infantry would advance. Then the cavalry would break whatever remained. They had crushed armies far larger than Athens. They had shattered cities richer, stronger, and more fortified to them. Marathon was not a battlefield. It was a formality across the plain. At the foot of the hills, the Athenians took their stand. There were no endless lines of tents, no sea of banners. Just 10,000 hoplites, heavy infantry, and a small force from the city of Plataea, who had chosen to stand with Athens, though it might mean their destruction. These were not professional soldiers. They were citizens, men who had left olive groves unharvested, workshops locked to children and parents behind city walls they might never see again. Each hoplite carried the weight of his own survival: a bronze helmet, a round shield as tall as his torso, a spear for killing, and a short sword for when killing became desperate and close. Their armor was heavy, their formation demanded discipline, and if that formation broke, they would not flee, they would be slaughtered. They formed a single long line across the narrow edge of the plain, anchored by mountains and marsh, not to surround the Persians, but to prevent being surrounded themselves. Between the two armies lay nearly a mile of open ground, a killing field. For days, neither side advanced. The Persians waited for Athens to crumble, for fear to fracture the line, for treachery in the city to open the gates. The Athenians waited for Sparta. Each sunrise brought the same question: will today be the day we die? Messengers came and went. Scouts watched the Persian camp. The generals argued. The men trained, ate in silence, and slept on their shields. And slowly, inevitably, they began to understand something chilling. No help was coming if Greece was to survive. It would begin here with them, on this plain, facing an empire. The morning mist hangs heavy over the plains of Marathon. Imagine the scene: thousands upon thousands of Persian tents stretching as far as the eye can see. This isn't just an army. It's a city on the move, a relentless war machine that has crushed every opponent in its path. At the heart of this force stands Datis, the Persian commander, surveying his domain with an air of absolute confidence. Why shouldn't he be? He commands a force that vastly outnumbers the small Athenian army huddled in the hills. Look closer at this incredible host. You can see the legendary immortals, the emperor's personal bodyguard, their armor gleaming even in the dim morning light. They are the elite, the best of the best, a symbol of Persian power. And then there's the cavalry, thousands of horses, restless and powerful, stamping the ground. The cavalry is the Persians' ace in the hole. On this flat, open plain, they are an unstoppable force, capable of flanking and annihilating any infantry that dares to meet them in open battle. The air is thick with the smell of leather, sweat, and the quiet, disciplined hum of a professional army preparing for what they believe will be an easy victory. So you have to ask the question, why would the Greeks even consider fighting here? Staring down at this scene from the hills, they can see the endless ranks of archers, the heavy infantry, and most terrifyingly, the cavalry divisions. It looks like a death trap. To come down from the high ground and fight on this flat plain seems like pure madness. Were they being foolish? Desperate? Or did they see something that we don't? Every logical military mind of the era would say this is suicide. The Persians are masters of open field combat. Their combined arms approach archers softening up the enemy, infantry pinning them down, and cavalry delivering the final crushing blow is nearly perfected. For the Athenians, with no cavalry of their own and far fewer archers, to meet them on these terms feels like walking into a lion's den armed with a stick. The Persian plan is brutally simple and effective. They will crush the small Athenian army here at Marathon, make an example of them, and then it's just a short sail to Athens itself. The city is waiting, undefended, its fate hanging on this single battle. Datis and his commanders are already looking past this fight, planning the sack of Athens and their triumphant return to the great King Darius. Victory here is not just a goal, it's a foregone conclusion. The morale in the Persian camp is sky high. They are the unstoppable force of a global empire, and these Greeks are just a minor obstacle on the path to total domination. The Persian soldiers are preparing for the day, sharpening blades, checking bowstrings, feeding their horses. The mood is not one of nervous anticipation, but of professional duty. They've done this before, countless times, across deserts and mountains. This small Greek peninsula is just another piece of land to be added to the vast Persian Empire. The stakes for them are about imperial pride and conquest. For the Athenians watching from the hills, the stakes are everything: their freedom, their city, their very existence. This stark contrast in motivation hangs in the air, a silent tension before the storm of battle. Think about the psychological pressure on the Greek commander, Miltiades. He sees the same thing we do. The overwhelming numbers, the cavalry threat, the tactical nightmare of the open plain. His fellow generals are arguing, some advising caution, others of full retreat, but Miltiades holds his ground, his eyes scanning the Persian camp, searching for something, anything a weakness, a flaw in their perfect machine. He knows a direct assault is impossible. He knows that if that Persian cavalry gets into the fight, his hoplites will be cut to ribbons. The fate of Western civilization rests on his shoulders, and he's staring at an unbeatable enemy. But then something changes, a ripple of unusual activity in the Persian camp. A movement that doesn't quite fit the pattern of an army preparing for an imminent, full-scale assault. It's subtle, easily missed. But Miltiades, a man who knows his enemy, sees it. There's a shift near the shoreline, a commotion among the cavalry divisions. Horses are being moved, not towards the battlefield, but perhaps towards the ships. Has a part of the Persian cavalry been loaded onto the transports? Are they trying to split their forces, sending a detachment by sea to attack Athens from another direction while the main army pins the Greeks here? This is the moment, the mid-battle revelation that changes everything. If even a portion of the Persian cavalry is temporarily off the field, the odds shift dramatically. The greatest threat to the Greek flanks, the weapon they feared most, might be gone. It's a window of opportunity, a sliver of a chance that might not last more than a few hours. A gamble of epic proportions presents itself. Does Datis believe the Greeks are too scared to attack, that he can afford to redeploy his cavalry without risk? Has his supreme confidence turned into a fatal arrogance? For Miltiades, this is the sign he has been waiting for. The impossible choice becomes clear. The trap might not be for the Greeks after all. The vast, powerful Persian war machine, in its moment of supreme confidence, has just revealed a crack in its armor. He sees a path to victory, a wild, desperate, and brilliant plan forming in his mind. The time for waiting is over. The time for a decision has come. With the Persian cavalry potentially out of play, the open ground of Marathon is no longer a death sentence. And as he gives the order, we cut to what happens next. The days stretched, and with each sunrise, the plain of Marathon felt less like a battlefield, and more like a grave waiting to be filled. The Persians, camped by the shore, were in no rush. Why would they be? Their massive fleet sat safely on the water, a constant looming threat. Their supply lines were perfect, a steady flow of food and water keeping their armies strong and their spirits high. They trained, they rested, they watched. They were confident, expecting the tiny Athenian force to simply crumble under the pressure. But inside the Greek camp, perched on the hillsides, the atmosphere was completely different. It was a place of tension and strained silence. Rations were carefully measured out. Water had to be carried down from the springs, a slow, laborious task. Soldiers spent hours checking and rechecking their armor, not because it needed it, but because their hands needed something to do, something to distract them from the gnawing fear. At night, sleep offered little escape. The sounds of the enemy camp drifted up the slopes, the distant laughter of men who had no fear of the morning, the restless stamping of thousands of horses, the low murmur of an army so vast it was hard to comprehend. Some men prayed to the gods for deliverance. Others sharpened blades that were already razor sharp, a ritual to focus. The mind, many wrote final messages on scraps of papyrus, letters to wives and children, to be delivered by a friend if they did not return from the battle to come. These weren't soldiers of a professional army. They were farmers, potters, and statesmen, men who had homes and families to lose. The command tent was the heart of this tension. The 10 Athenian generals, the strategoi, were deeply divided. Athenian democracy, in its wisdom, had given each general equal authority, with command rotating between them each day. This system, designed to prevent any one man from becoming a tyrant, was now threatening to paralyze them. Some argued to wait for the Spartans, their famed allies who were delayed by a religious festival. They believed that facing the Persian horde without Spartan heavy infantry was suicide. Others wanted to abandon Marathon altogether, to withdraw the army back to Athens and defend the city from behind its walls. A terrifying thought began to circulate. What if the Persians didn't even bother with the army? What if they simply re-embarked their troops, sailed around the coast, and landed directly at the undefended port of Athens itself? The army would be stranded, the city would fall, and the war would be over before it truly began. But one general, Miltiades, saw the situation with brutal clarity. He understood what the others feared to say aloud. Time was not their ally. Every hour they waited, the Persians grew stronger, more settled, more confident. And more importantly, every day they hesitated. The risk of betrayal from within Athens itself grew. There were pro-Persian factions in the city, those who believed submission was a better path than annihilation. Miltiades knew that if the army appeared weak or indecisive, these factions would be emboldened. He argued relentlessly. In the command tent, he paced, his voice raw with urgency. He warned that this hesitation was a poison that would lead to disaster. The disaster would either happen here on this field, where they would be starved out and overwhelmed, or it would happen behind the walls of Athens, and the gates were thrown open from the inside. He insisted that their only hope, their single fleeting chance, was to attack now, to strike while the formidable Persian cavalry was away foraging for their horses, to fight while the resolve of the Athenian citizen soldiers, though strained, still held firm. An attack now would be unexpected, it would be audacious, and it might just be the only thing that could work. But his words fell on a deadlocked council. The vote among the 10 generals was split. 5, inspired by Miltiades, voted to fight. 5, led by caution and fear, voted to wait. 10 days had passed since they arrived at Marathon, and they were no closer to a decision. 10 days of watching the enemy grow stronger while their own supplies dwindled. The fate of Athens, and perhaps the future of Western civilization, hung on a knife's edge, balanced on this perfect, paralyzing stalemate. Everything now rested on one man, not a general, but the polemarch, the war archon of Athens, a man named Callimachus. By Athenian law, the polemarch held a special position. He was an honorary member of the war council and held the deciding vote in the event of a tie. The future was in his hands. Realizing the gravity of the moment, Miltiades went to Callimachus alone, away from the heated arguments of the other generals. He didn't speak of glory or honor. He didn't promise an easy victory. He spoke of survival. He laid out the stark reality of their situation. He told Callimachus that history would remember this moment, and it would remember him. He would either be the man who allowed Athens to be erased from the earth, or he would be the man who gave it a chance to fight for its existence. He painted a grim picture of what Persian victory would mean. It wasn't just defeat in battle. It would be the complete dismantling of their city, their laws, their assembly, their freedom. Everything they had built would be turned to ash and memory. He told Callimachus, on your shoulders rests the choice to enslave Athens or to keep her free, and to leave a memorial of your name for all future generations that will be greater than even that of Harmodius and Aristogiton. He was invoking the names of the famous tyrant slayers, the ultimate symbols of Athenian liberty. The choice was simple: slavery or freedom, oblivion or a chance at immortality. Callimachus listened, his face unreadable in the flickering torchlight. He weighed the terror of the Persian numbers against the terror of Miltiades' words. He weighed the certainty of slow defeat against the slim possibility of a miraculous victory. When the council of generals assembled one last time, the air was thick with unspoken dread. The 10 generals had already cast their votes. 5 for battle, 5 against. Silence fell as all eyes turned to the polemarch. Callimachus stood, and in a clear, steady voice, he cast his vote for battle. The decision shot through the camp. Like a lightning strike, the suffocating weight of indecision was lifted, replaced by a new, sharp-edged certainty. There would be no more waiting, no more watching the horizon for Spartan shields that might never come, no more sleepless nights wondering what the enemy was planning. Now they had a plan of their own. Before the first light of dawn touched the sky, the orders were whispered down the lines. Men who had been restless for days now moved. With quiet purpose, armor was strapped on, not as a nervous habit, but for its intended use. Helmets were secured, greaves were tied tight, spears that had been planted in the earth were pulled free. The men took their places in the phalanx, shoulder to shoulder, shield to shield. They were no longer just individuals, farmers and artisans filled with fear. They were a single, breathing wall of bronze and wood and courage. A living embodiment of Athenian resolve somewhere across the plain, in the vast and sprawling encampment by the sea, the Persian army still slept. They were unaware of the debate that had raged in the Greek camp. They were unaware of the vote that had just sealed their fate. They did not yet know that the moment of battle they believed would never come, the moment they had been so casually waiting for, was already moving toward them through the pre-dawn darkness. The wait was over. History was about to be made. The sun peaks over the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the plain of Marathon. 4 days, 2 armies have stared each other down in a silent, nerve-wracking standoff. On one side, the citizen soldiers of Athens and Plataea, the hoplite phalanx, a wall of bronze and wood. Their red-crested helmets are the only splash of defiant color against the muted tones of dawn. Across the field, stretching as far as the eye can see, is the might of the Persian Empire. The air is thick with tension, so heavy you can almost taste it. This is the calm before a storm of unimaginable violence. Every man in the Greek line knows the odds are impossible. They are outnumbered, perhaps by as much as 3-1. The Persian force isn't just infantry. They have cavalry, the ancient world's equivalent of tanks, waiting to smash into their flanks. They have archers, thousands of them, ready to blot out the sun with a rain of arrows. For the Greeks, a conventional battle means certain death. Their commander, Miltiades, knows this better than anyone. He has fought with the Persians, he understands their tactics, and he knows that to win, he must do something no one expects. As the soldiers wait, clutching their spears, their knuckles white, Miltiades walks the line. He isn't just a general. He's one of them, a citizen asking other citizens to lay down their lives for an idea, the idea of freedom, of a world not ruled by a distant king. He knows the Persian strategy. They will pin the Greek center with their best infantry while their cavalry sweeps around the sides, enveloping and crushing the smaller army. It's a classic, effective maneuver that has conquered half the known world. Miltiades needs a counter, something so audacious it borders on madness. And so he gives the order. The Greek officers begin to reposition their men. Soldiers are pulled from the center of the phalanx, thinning it out until it's dangerously weak, only a few ranks deep. A murmur of confusion and fear ripples through the line. Why would you weaken your own center? That's the heart of the phalanx, the point of greatest strength. Are they about to break before the battle has even begun? Is this a desperate, last-ditch effort to save some of the men? To the Persians watching from across the field, it must have looked like the Greeks were already beaten, their discipline cracking under the immense pressure. But the men being pulled from the center aren't retreating. They're being sent to the sides, to the wings of the army. Miltiades is strengthening his flanks, turning the traditional phalanx formation on its head. He's intentionally creating a weak point, baiting a trap. He's gambling that the Persians will do exactly what he expects them to do, push hard against his fragile center. He's inviting the enemy's best troops into a pocket, hoping his reinforced flanks can then fold in and surround them. It's a brilliant, high-stakes gamble. If his thin center breaks too quickly, the entire army will be shattered. If his flanks aren't strong enough to hold and then will inward, they will be annihilated. Everything, every life, the future of Athens itself hangs on this single, desperate tactical roll of the dice. The Persian commanders see the strange Greek formation and smile. They see a weak center, a sign of fear. They signal their own advance. The heart of the Persian army, their elite infantry, moves forward, confident of a quick victory. They expect the Greeks to stand and receive the charge, to be softened up by arrows before the final brutal clash. That's how battles were fought. A slow, grinding advance, a volley of arrows, and then a push of shields and spears. It was a predictable, deadly dance. But Miltiades has one more surprise. As the Persians begin their ponderous advance, he raises his hand. The Greek line is a full mile away from the enemy, far outside of effective bow range. The soldiers brace themselves. They expect the order to hold, to absorb the arrow storm and the initial charge. Instead, Miltiades gives an order that has never been given before in the history of Greek warfare. He orders the unthinkable. He shouts the command, and it echoes down the line, passed from officer to soldier. It's a single word: charge. But not just charge. He commands them to run. The entire Greek army, thousands of men encased in 70 pounds of bronze armor, begins to run. Not a jog, not a quick march, but a full, desperate sprint across a mile of open ground. Shields held high, spears leveled, a wave of bronze and muscle thundering across the plain. Imagine the sheer shock from the Persian side, an army of heavily armored infantry running at them like madmen. It was insane. It defied all military logic. The Greeks would be exhausted by the time they reached the Persian line, breathless and disorganized. Their phalanx formation, their greatest strength, would surely break apart in the mad dash. The Persian archers, caught completely by surprise, only had time for one or two disorganized volleys, most of their arrows falling harmlessly. Behind the charging mass, the Greeks didn't stop. They closed the distance in minutes, a screaming, roaring tide of humanity. They were running to get under the arrow fire. They were running to smash into the enemy line with terrifying momentum before the Persian cavalry could be deployed effectively. They were running because their general had bet everything on speed, shock, and the sheer audacity of his plan. In that moment, as the first hoplites crashed into the startled Persian front line, history wasn't just being made. It was being accelerated. The gamble was on. As the first light of dawn spilled across the plain of Marathon, the Athenian army formed for battle. Bronze helmets caught the rising sun, shields locked edge to edge, spears tilted forward like a field of iron. 10,000 men stood in silence. No war cries, no drums, only the wind off the sea and the distant sound of the Persian camp stirring. The generals moved along the line, speaking quietly, adjusting ranks, offering final words swallowed by the morning air. At the center stood Miltiades. He raised his arm, and the signal was given. The Greek line began to move. At first, it was just a walk. Heavy armor creaked. Sand shifted beneath thousands of feet. The distance between the armies slowly collapsed. The Persians watched in disbelief. No Greek army had ever advanced this way. No force burdened with bronze should have crossed so much open ground under arrow fire. Then, halfway across the plain, Miltiades gave the second signal, and the Athenians broke into a run. A wall of bronze surged forward. The earth thundered, Persian horns sounded. Archers rushed to position. The first volleys of arrows darkened the sky, falling among the Greeks like black rain. Shields rose, spears shattered, men fell, but the line did not break. Through dust and pain and flying shafts, the Athenians charged on, closing the killing distance faster than any enemy had ever dared. And then they struck. Bronze met wicker. Iron met flesh. The crash of shields echoed across the plain like splitting stone. The Persian center held, absorbing the impact, but on the Greek flanks, something extraordinary was unfolding. Miltiades had thinned his center and strengthened his wings, and now those wings drove inward like closing jaws. The Athenian left and right smashed through Persian lines, then wheeled, turning back toward the center. What began as a clash became an encirclement. Persian soldiers, masters of distance and maneuver, now found themselves trapped in the worst kind of war. Close, relentless, personal. Greek spears stabbed over shields, short swords flashed. The press of bodies erased all order. Commands were lost. Banners fell. The roar of two armies became a single, endless thunder. Slowly, impossibly, the Persian center began to give way. Then it broke. What followed was not a retreat. It was a collapse. Men turned, lines dissolved. The great host that had arrived in perfect formation now fled in scattered waves toward the sea. The Athenians pursued them across the plain, into marshes, over bodies, through shattered camps. Persian ships pushed off desperately from shore as soldiers fought to reach them. Some drowned beneath the weight of armor. Others were cut down at the water's edge, where the sea itself was stained dark. By midday it was over. Where an empire had stood, only wreckage remained. 7,000 Persians lay dead. Athens had lost fewer than 200. Against all reason, against all expectation, the plain of Marathon belonged to Greece, and somewhere among the exhausted, blood-streaked survivors, a runner turned back toward Athens, carrying news the world had never heard before. The air is thick with dust and the coppery tang of blood. Arrows scream through the sky, so many they nearly blot out the sun. This is Marathon, and for the 10,000 Athenians staring across the plain, this is the end of the world. Before them, a sea of Persian might, easily outnumbering them 2-1, maybe more. The ground trembles as the Persian cavalry, the pride of their army, thunders on the flanks. At the center, the elite immortals, warriors who have never known defeat, stand ready. For the Greeks, there is no retreat. Their ships, their homes, their families are behind them. The only way is forward at the command of the general Miltiades. The impossible happens. The Athenians begin to run, not away, but directly at the Persian line. A full mile, clad in bronze armor weighing over 70 pounds, they charge. The Persians are stunned. This isn't a strategy. It's madness. They loose volley after volley of arrows, but the Greeks, with their heavy shields and helmets, keep coming, a wave of bronze and fury closing the distance with terrifying speed. The impact is like a thunderclap. Bronze smashes against wicker shields, spears splinter, and the disciplined Persian line buckles under the sheer violence of the hoplite charge. The Greeks are a meat grinder, their long spears finding gaps in the lighter Persian armor, their heavy shields forming an unbreakable wall. For the first few moments, it's a slaughter. The Persian front ranks, unprepared for such ferocity, are decimated, but numbers are a weapon all their own. Slowly, inexorably, the massive Persian army begins to push back. The Greek center, where they are thinnest, starts to give way. The immortals, the best of the best, surge forward, smelling victory. This is the moment the Persians have been waiting for. They pour into the gap, driving the Athenian center back further and further. The Greek line bends, looking like it's about to snap. From the Persian perspective, the battle is almost won. Their elite troops have broken the enemy's core, and now they can wheel around and destroy the rest. They overextend, pushing deeper into the Greek formation, hungry to finish the fight. The Athenian retreat looks desperate, disorganized. It seems like the end for the tiny Greek army, but Miltiades is watching from the edge of the fray, his heart pounding. This is it, the moment he gambled everything on. This wasn't a retreat, it was a trap. The weakened center was a deliberate lure, a piece of bait for the overconfident Persian command. As the Persian elite charge deeper, they don't realize that the Greek flanks, held strong and deep, have not moved. They've held their ground, defeating the lesser troops on the Persian wings, and now they turn. The trap springs. The powerful Greek flanks, which had seemed like a defensive measure, pivot inward with terrifying precision. The Persian forces that had broken the center suddenly find themselves under attack, not from the front, but from both sides. The hunters have become the hunted. The disciplined hoplite formations close in. Like the jaws of a vice, panic erupts in the Persian ranks. They are surrounded, packed so tightly they can barely lift their weapons. There is no formation, no order, only chaos and fear. The Greeks, relentless and merciless, press their advantage. The phalanx becomes a crushing machine, and the elite of the Persian army are caught in its gears. What follows is not a battle, but a massacre. The Persians break and run, throwing down their shields and weapons, desperate to get back to the safety of their ships. The Greeks pursue them, cutting them down as they flee across the marshy plain. The chase continues all the way to the beaches, where the Athenians fight to set the Persian fleet ablaze. The proud invaders, who had come to conquer Greece, are now fighting for their very lives, scrambling into longboats, trying to escape the bronze nightmare they have unleashed. When the dust finally settles and the cries of battle fade, the scale of the victory is staggering. The field is littered with the bodies of over 6,000 Persians. Among the dead are nobles, commanders, and countless immortals who learned too late that they were not invincible, and the Athenian cost for this legendary victory. Just 192 men, 192 citizens who gave their lives to save their world. They carried the news of their victory, but as the sun began to set on the blood-soaked field, the Athenians looked towards the sea at the ships that had escaped. They knew with a chilling certainty that the battle for Marathon was won, but the war for Greece was far from over. The remaining Persian fleet wasn't retreating home. It was sailing for Athens itself. Imagine this scene. An ancient Greek runner, dust-caked on his weary body, stumbles into the heart of Athens. The sun sets behind him, casting a long, dramatic shadow. He has run for miles, an impossible distance, carrying a message that will change the course of history. With his last ounce of strength, he gasps out a single word to the anxious crowd gathered before him. It's a cry of triumph, a declaration that means we have won. And then, having delivered his vital news, he collapses, his life's mission complete. He dies on the spot, a hero etched into legend. This is the story of Pheidippides, the legendary messenger whose final desperate run from the battlefield of Marathon to Athens gave birth to one of the most grueling and respected athletic events in the world, the marathon. It's a powerful tale of sacrifice, endurance, and ultimate victory. For over 2 millennia, this story has inspired countless runners to push their own limits, to lace up their shoes and chase that same feeling of triumph over an incredible distance. The modern marathon, a race of 26.2 miles or 42.195 kilometers, is a direct homage to this legendary feat. Every person who crosses that finish line is, in a way, reenacting Pheidippides' heroic journey. They are testing the very limits of their physical and mental fortitude, just as he did. But how much of this incredible story is actually true? Did a man really run himself to death to deliver good news? This is where history and legend begin to blur, creating a fascinating puzzle that historians have debated for centuries. When we dig into the ancient texts, the story gets a lot more complicated and, frankly, even more amazing. The primary source for the Battle of Marathon is the historian Herodotus, who was writing just a few decades after the battle took place. He is considered the father of history, and his accounts are our best window into that time. Interestingly, Herodotus does mention a runner named Pheidippides, but the story he tells is quite different. According to Herodotus, before the battle even began, the Athenians sent Pheidippides not from Marathon to Athens, but from Athens all the way to Sparta. His mission was to request aid from the famously formidable Spartan army. This was an incredibly arduous journey of about 150 miles, or 240 kilometers, over rough, mountainous terrain. Herodotus writes that Pheidippides made this astonishing trip in just 2 days. Think about that for a moment. That's like running nearly 6 marathons back to back, with no modern running shoes, no energy gels, and no paved roads. It's a feat of endurance that almost defies belief. So a heroic run did happen, but its purpose and destination were entirely different in Herodotus's account. He never mentions a run from Marathon to Athens after the victory. So where did the famous story of "and the collapse in Athens" come from? It actually appears much later. We have to jump forward more than 500 years after the Battle of Marathon to find it. A writer named Plutarch, living under the Roman Empire, tells a version of the story. He writes that a messenger ran from Marathon to Athens with the news of victory, shouted, "We have won," and died. But here's the twist. Plutarch names the runner as either Thersippus or Eucles, not Pheidippides. The name we associate so strongly with the marathon legend isn't even in his version. The version of the story that we all know today, the one that combines the name Pheidippides with the dramatic run from Marathon to Athens, comes from an even later source, a satirist named Lucian who lived in the 2nd century AD. That's a full 600 years after the battle. Lucian was known for his witty and sometimes exaggerated storytelling. He was the one who put all the pieces together into the single powerful narrative that has captured our imaginations ever since. He took the name of the runner from Herodotus' account of the run to Sparta and merged it with the dramatic death scene described by Plutarch. It created a perfect, unforgettable legend. So does this mean the story is a complete fabrication? Not necessarily. It's more likely a blend of different historical events and oral traditions that evolved over time. The core truth is that long-distance running was a critical part of ancient Greek life, especially in warfare. Messengers, known as hemerodromi or day runners, were elite athletes trained to cover vast distances at incredible speeds. They were the communication network of the ancient world. The run from Marathon to Athens, a distance of about 25 miles, would have been a standard task for such a runner. It's entirely plausible that a messenger did make this run. Whether he died at the end is the legendary part. The story likely grew in the telling, becoming more dramatic and symbolic with each passing generation, until it became the myth we know today. The legend was so powerful that when the modern Olympic Games were revived in Athens in 1896, the organizers wanted to create a signature event that would celebrate Greece's ancient glory. A French philologist and historian named Michel, a friend of the Olympic founder Pierre de Coubertin, suggested a race that would reenact Pheidippides' legendary run. He proposed a race from the village of Marathon to the Olympic Stadium in Athens. The idea was an instant hit. It connected the modern games directly to the heroism of the ancient world, and so the marathon was born as an official athletic event. On that historic day in 1896, the race was won by a Greek water carrier named Spyridon Lewis. His victory was a moment of immense national pride for Greece. It felt as though the spirit of Phidippides himself had been reborn. A Greek had won the race inspired by a Greek legend on Greek soil. The crowd erupted, and the marathon was immediately cemented as the ultimate event of the Olympic Games, a true test of human spirit and endurance. The legend had become a reality. Today, millions of people around the world participate in marathons, from the massive city races in Boston, London, and Tokyo to smaller local events. Each runner has their own personal reason for taking on the challenge. For some, it's about fitness. For others, it's about raising money for a cause. And for many, it's about proving something to themselves, about pushing past their perceived limits and achieving something extraordinary. Every time a runner crosses that finish line, exhausted but triumphant, they are connecting with that ancient, powerful story of Phidippides. They are part of a tradition that spans millennia, a testament to the enduring power of a good story. The historical debate over whether the run actually happened exactly as the legend tells it is fascinating, but in a way it misses the point. The legend's true power isn't in its historical accuracy, it's in its symbolism. It's a story about the absolute limit of human devotion and the idea that one person's sacrifice can secure the future for everyone else. It embodies the concept of giving everything you have for a greater cause. This is the idea that has resonated through the ages and inspired so many. But while the marathon race is the most famous legacy of the Battle of Marathon, it wasn't the most important one. The victory itself, announced by that legendary runner, had consequences that reached far beyond the world of athletics. It shaped the course of Western civilization in ways we are still feeling today. The real legacy of marathon wasn't about a race against time and distance. It was about a battle for the very soul of a new idea, a radical experiment in how human beings could govern themselves. The victory at Marathon didn't just save Athens, it saved the world's first democracy. And that story is where we're heading next. Why does Marathon matter, or is it just a symbol of defiance? Now we have relived the story of the Battle of Marathon. Let us try to discuss what some sect would call inconsistencies or irregularities in the story. The Battle of Marathon happened many centuries ago. Without video evidence, we rely on accounts from historians and scholars to relieve such stories. Do you have your own doubts and thoughts, or do you have a piece of evidence that could influence the narrative as we know it today? I would like to hear them in the comments below. But we do know that history is sometimes written to favor the victor. What we call the Battle of Marathon feels solid, fixed, certain, a date, a place, a victory. But when modern historians return to the ancient sources, they do not find a single, unbroken story. They find fractures. The first crack appears in time itself. The battle is traditionally dated to 490 BC, but even this is not beyond dispute. Some scholars argue for 491, others accept 490 but debate the season. Late summer, early autumn, August, September, October. The ancient calendars do not align cleanly with ours, and the sources are too imprecise to close the question. Marathon, it seems, already drifts in a fog of uncertainty. Then there is the problem of the Persian army. Some modern theories suggest the Persian commanders split their forces after the fall of Eretria, sending part of the army by sea toward Athens while leaving the rest at Marathon. This would explain certain gaps in the narrative. It would also conveniently explain how the Athenians dared to attack. But this idea collides with both logic and evidence. Dividing an invading army in enemy territory violates one of the oldest principles of warfare. Never weaken yourself in the presence of an intact enemy. More importantly, the one ancient author closest to the event, Herodotus, gives no hint that the Persian army was divided. Not a sentence, not a rumor. and the Greek battle line itself, stretched dangerously thin across the plain, strongly suggests they were facing a force of overwhelming size. If the Persians had been reduced, the Athenians would not have needed to gamble their entire civilization on a single desperate stroke. The ground beneath the battle is also contested. Traditional accounts often place the Persians with their backs to the sea, ships drawn up behind them, yet many modern scholars find this improbable. No experienced commander would willingly trap his army between enemy spears and open water. Archaeology complicates the picture. Ancient art and later excavations suggest that when the Persian line broke, many soldiers fled not into the sea but into the marshes at the edge of the plain, where heavy armor dragged them down and Greek pursuit finished what the battle had begun. If this is true, then centuries of paintings and retellings have aimed the Persians in the wrong direction. Even the length of the battle, so often imagined as a long and grinding struggle, may be an illusion. Greek losses were astonishingly low, fewer than 200 dead against an army many times their size. Such figures point not to a drawn-out contest, but to a rapid collapse, perhaps a sudden rupture in the Persian line that turned order into flight in a matter of moments. Marathon may not have been a long war, it may have been a shock, and then there is the cavalry. Whole modern reconstructions depend on the idea that the Persian horsemen were absent when the fighting began, perhaps re-embarked, perhaps repositioned. Without this absence, the famous Greek charge becomes harder to explain. Yet this theory rests on silence. No ancient source clearly states the cavalry were gone and Marathon's open. Plain was ideal ground for them. To many historians, the complete disappearance of Persian cavalry from the narrative is not evidence, it is a problem. Underlying all of this is a deeper issue. Almost everything we think we know about Marathon flows from one voice, Herodotus, writing decades later, relying on memory, oral accounts, patriotic tradition, and local storytelling. A Greek writing for Greeks. In a world where Marathon had already become a symbol, Herodotus is invaluable, and he is not neutral. He admired Athens. He distrusted tyranny. He shaped his histories not only to record events, but to explore moral meaning. His Persians often appear as instruments of fate, his Greeks as agents of choice. He gives speeches he could never have heard, motives he could never verify. He is not lying, but he is not merely recording. He is interpreting, and between interpretation, memory, pride, and time, legend seeps in. The modern view, therefore, is not that Marathon is false. It is that Marathon is layered, a real battle wrapped in storytelling, filtered through trauma, triumph, and identity. The shields were real, the dead were real. But the story that survives has been shaped by bias, by distance, by the human need to turn chaos into meaning. Marathon still matters, but not because we know everything about it, because even now, we are still arguing over its shadows. Imagine a world where one battle, one single day didn't happen. What would our world look like? The Battle of Marathon in 490 BC wasn't just a clash of armies. It was a turning point for history itself. Before this day, the Persian Empire, stretching from India to the Aegean Sea, seemed invincible. Its resources were endless, its armies vast. The free cities of Greece, scattered and often squabbling amongst themselves, were seen as little more than a stepping stone for the great King Darius. The air on the plains of Marathon must have been thick with tension. On one side, the might of Persia, a force that had crushed kingdoms and swallowed empires. On the other, a small Athenian army, perhaps 10,000 strong, fighting not just for their city, but for their very way of life. They were outnumbered, out-equipped, and facing a power that knew only victory. The odds were impossibly long. The rest of Greece watched, holding its breath. A Persian victory seemed inevitable. It was just a matter of when, yet something incredible happened. Against all expectations, the Athenians, led by the brilliant strategist Miltiades, didn't just defend. They attacked. With a daring plan, they weakened their center and strengthened their flanks, creating a pincer that enveloped and crushed the Persian forces. The Persians, stunned and broken, fled back to their ships. This victory sent a shockwave across the ancient world. In Athens, the news, famously carried by the runner Phidippides, sparked not just celebration, but a surge of self-belief that would change everything. This newfound confidence was the bedrock upon which the golden age of Athens was built. It was the fuel for the defiance that would follow. Without the belief born at Marathon, would the Spartans have made their legendary stand at Thermopylae 10 years later? Would the Athenian navy have dared to face the Persian fleet at Salamis? Think about it. The Persian king Xerxes, Darius's son, returned a decade later with an even larger force, determined to avenge his father's defeat and subjugate Greece once and for all. The stand of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae is iconic, a testament to courage against overwhelming odds, but that stand was inspired by the knowledge that Persia could be defeated. It was a strategic delay, buying precious time for the rest of Greece, particularly Athens, to prepare, and prepare they did. The Athenian leader Themistocles had convinced his people to invest in a powerful navy. At the Battle of Salamis, these ships, manned by confident Athenian sailors, lured the massive Persian fleet into the narrow straits and decimated it. This naval victory was the decisive blow. It shattered Xerxes' invasion and secured the future of Greece. But the confidence to build that fleet, to stand and fight at sea, was forged on the plains of Marathon 10 years earlier. Marathon was the psychological foundation for all that came after. The consequences of this victory echo down to our present day. At the time of Marathon, Athens was nurturing a radical new idea, democracy, rule by the people. This was a fragile experiment, a flickering candle in a world ruled by kings and emperors. Had Athens fallen, this experiment would have been extinguished before it ever truly had a chance to shine. The concepts of citizen rights, of voting, of public debate, all of these could have been lost to history, dismissed as the failed project of a conquered city. Instead, protected by the stunning victory at Marathon, Athenian democracy flourished. It became the laboratory for political and philosophical ideas that would shape the course of Western civilization. The works of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, the plays of Sophocles and Euripides, the architecture of the Parthenon, all of this blossomed in the century of security and confidence that Marathon helped to create. The battle didn't just save a city. It saved an idea. It protected the cradle of a new way of thinking about humanity, society, and governance. The ripple effect is immense. The philosophical and political traditions born in ancient Greece were later adopted and adapted by the Romans. They were preserved through the Middle Ages and rediscovered during the Renaissance, fueling a new age of art, science, and humanism. These ideas journeyed across the Atlantic, influencing the founders of modern nations and the architects of modern democratic governments. The belief that citizens should have a say in their own destiny, a core principle of many societies today, has a direct lineage back to that dusty plain near Athens. Marathon became more than just a battle. It became a symbol. It stands for the idea that the seemingly powerless can stand up to the overwhelmingly powerful. It's a testament to the fact that courage, strategy, and the will to defend one's home can overcome brute force and sheer numbers. A small city proved that empires can bleed. It's a story that has inspired countless generations, a reminder that the course of history is not always predetermined by the powerful. So when we look back at the grand sweep of history, at the rise and fall of empires, we see that pivotal moments often hinge on the courage of a few. The victory at Marathon ensured that the voice of a small Greek city-state would not be silenced. Instead, its ideas about freedom, art, philosophy, and democracy were allowed to grow, to spread, and to fundamentally shape the world we inhabit today. It's a powerful lesson. Sometimes history turns not on the size of an army or the wealth of an empire, but on the unwavering courage of those who dare to stand for what they believe in. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into the past meaningful, consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories that shaped our world. See you next time.